Some days begin with hope so pure, it feels almost untouchable. For Jalen Carter, a bright-eyed teenager from Riverton, today was supposed to be one of those days. The town around him seemed to hum with quiet joy, the kind you don't even notice until it's broken. Families laughed in the parks, the sun brushed everything in gold, and even the old farmer's market bustled with easy conversations and the scent of fresh bread. Everything about this Saturday whispered that it would be perfect. Jalen wasn't here just to enjoy the sunlight or the smiles of strangers. No, he had a mission. After months of brewing coffee and bussing tables, saving every crumpled tip and scraped paycheck, he finally had enough to buy the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Aaliyah. He had chosen it carefully, a silver charm bracelet from Belmont Jewelers, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. The idea of seeing her face light up when she opened the box had kept him going through every long shift. It wasn't just a bracelet. It was a piece of his heart wrapped in silver. As he approached the towering glass doors of Belmont, he paused, feeling the weight of the moment. Adjusting his hoodie, a casual reflex more than anything, he caught his reflection in the sparkling windows. Underneath, his neatly pressed polo shirt peeked out, a quiet reminder to himself and the world that he belonged here. He hesitated. He knew what people sometimes saw when they looked at a young black man in a hoodie, but today wasn't about fear. Today was about love. Squaring his shoulders, he pushed open the door. A soft chime echoed through the luxurious space. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of polished wood and expensive cologne. Light bounced off glass cases, illuminating rows of gold, diamonds, and emeralds, more wealth than Jalen had ever held in his hands. Most of the customers were older, affluent women, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes briefly flickering toward him with a mixture of curiosity and something colder, harder to name. He ignored it. He had one goal. His heart sped up as he spotted the bracelet gleaming under the bright lights. It was even more beautiful up close. Behind the counter stood a woman whose presence immediately changed the air around him. Margaret Whitmore, middle-aged, meticulously put together, her blonde hair styled in a tight, almost severe way, watched him approach. Her face was practiced neutrality, but Jalen could feel the shift the moment her eyes settled on him. It was a subtle thing, a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a hand resting just a little too protectively over the countertop. Jalen knew that look. He had grown up learning how to read it in fractions of a second. "What are you doing here?" it said without ever speaking. "You don't belong." Still, he smiled politely, steadying his voice as he pointed toward the bracelet. "I'd like to see that one, please." He said it the way his mother had taught him, calm, respectful, giving no reason for fear or doubt. But the woman didn't move, right away. Instead, she folded her arms and cocked her head slightly, her voice dripping with patronizing disbelief as she asked, "Are you sure? That one's quite expensive." A stone of unease settled in Jalen's stomach, but he stood his ground. He pulled out his wallet, showing her the stack of neatly folded cash he had worked so hard to save. "I'm sure," he said firmly. For a split second, he hoped that would be enough. But deep down, he already knew. In some places, for some people, proof was never enough. And that's when everything started to unravel. Margaret Whitmore didn't reach for the bracelet. Instead, she leaned against the counter, arms crossed, inspecting Jalen with an icy sort of amusement, as if daring him to prove he deserved to be there. Her voice, casual on the surface, but laced with a razor-thin blade underneath, cut through the heavy air. "And where exactly?" she asked, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Did you get all that money?" The room, already thick with quiet judgment, seemed to shrink around Jalen. He felt his stomach twist but kept his face neutral, just like his mother had taught him. "I work at Parker's Coffee House," he replied, each word crisp and deliberate. "I've been saving for months," Margaret hummed, tapping her manicured nails against the glass counter. A small sound, but one that screamed disbelief louder than any words could. She didn't have to say it. Her gaze did enough. A young black boy with a fistful of cash? Suspicion was inevitable in her world. For a brief moment, Jalen's heart hammered against his ribs, a silent plea that maybe, just maybe, this woman would see him for what he was, a hard-working brother trying to do something good. But Margaret's disdain only deepened. Her hand hovered near the store phone, fingers twitching. Finally, with a long sigh, she pulled out the tray, laying the velvet mat down as if it were some monumental inconvenience. "Be careful," she sneered. "It's worth more than you probably make in a year." Jalen clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe through the insult. This wasn't about dignity anymore. It was about his sister, about the promise he had made himself. He picked up the bracelet, handling it with a reverence that no one else in the store seemed willing to grant him. The cool silver danced between his fingers, gleaming under the lights, until, with a sickening slip, it tumbled from his hand, landing on the glass counter before rolling off and hitting the floor with a faint, traitorous clink. The world froze. Jalen's breath caught in his throat. His hand twitched, instinctively reaching down. But Margaret was faster. Her shriek split the store like a siren. "Oh my God, I knew it!" she screamed, her voice shrill and triumphant. Every head turned toward them. Every whispered conversation died. The judgment in the room, once a silent undercurrent, now roared to the surface. Jalen stammered, "Wait." But Margaret wasn't listening. She jabbed a finger at him, her face a twisted mask of outrage. "You were trying to steal it. You thought you'd get away with it, didn't you?" The accusation hit harder than any shove. Jalen stood frozen, the weight of the moment crushing him. He hadn't even moved, hadn't even pocketed anything. But the story Margaret was painting, a young black male, hoodie, cash in hand, accidental drops, was too easy, too familiar. Margaret lunged for the phone, dialing furiously. "Get the police here now, we've got a thief," she barked, her voice shaking with manufactured fear. "Young black male, hoodie, tried to steal." The words, once spoken, hung in the air like a death sentence. Jalen looked around, desperately seeking an ally, someone, anyone, who would speak up. But the customers averted their eyes. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A man in a tailored suit shook his head, confirming every ugly thought he already had about boys who looked like Jalen. Inside his chest, Jalen's heart pounded, a brutal reminder that he was alone. The distant wail of sirens sliced through the stillness outside, getting louder, closer. Jalen forced himself to breathe, to stay still. His instincts screamed at him to move, to run, but he knew better. Any sudden movement, any wrong step, and this scene would spiral into something far, far worse. Margaret's voice crackled through the phone, dripping with urgency. "He's still here. He's getting aggressive." Jalen's fists clenched. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved toward her, hadn't even defended himself. But none of that mattered. Margaret had cast her version of the story, and the room had accepted it without question. The heavy glass door burst open, and 2 police officers stormed inside. Everything in the store shifted. The air, the tension, the silent agreement of who was right and who was wrong. "There he is," Margaret cried, pointing at Jalen like he was an escaped convict. Jalen barely had time to react before one of the officers, a tall, broad man, with graying hair and a badge reading Sergeant Blake, advanced on him. "Sir, hands where I can see them," Blake barked, already reaching for his handcuffs. Jalen's breath caught. His fingers twitched, frozen between fear and restraint. He knew better. He raised his hands slowly, showing them clearly. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Blake's scowl deepened. Margaret scoffed loudly from behind the counter. "You're seriously going to argue after I caught you?" she sneered, her words painting Jalen as defiant, dangerous. "The nerve of you people." Those words sliced deeper than any accusation. You people. The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, his name tag reading Doyle, hesitated, his gaze flickering uncertainly between Jalen and Margaret. Jalen saw it, the tiniest crack in the wall of assumption, but it didn't matter. Blake was already closing in, handcuffs gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Son, step outside," Blake ordered. Jalen's mind raced. He could see the headlines already. Black teen arrested at jewelry store. He could see the narrative already written. The trial by public opinion he would never win. Margaret stood behind the counter, arms crossed smugly, watching it all unfold. Exactly how she had wanted. Jalen inhaled sharply, his voice cutting through the charged air. "Call my mother," he said. Blake scoffed. "You can make your phone call at the station." "No," Jalen said, louder now, the first edge of real defiance creeping into his tone. "Call her. Now." Margaret rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, sure. Call Mommy. What's she going to do? Cry discrimination? Shout about rights?" Jalen ignored her. Calmly, carefully, he pulled out his phone, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He dialed, his hands surprisingly steady. "Mom," he said when the call connected. "I need you. Belmont Jewelers. Now." And then he waited. The sirens had stopped, but the store was still suffocatingly tense. The customers had backed away, murmuring amongst themselves. Phones discreetly lifted to capture the scene. Margaret tapped her foot, impatient. Blake shifted the cuffs restlessly in his hands. Doyle checked his watch, stealing uncertain glances at Jalen. And then the door swung open again. A woman entered. Tall, poised, wearing a crisp navy suit that seemed to command the very air around her. Her heels clicked with authority against the tile floor. Her dark eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the room. Without hesitation, she flashed a badge. "I'm Dr. Simone Carter," she said, her voice slicing through the store like a blade. "Chief of Police, Riverton PD." She turned to Blake. "And this," she said, her voice steady and dangerous, "is my son." The store fell into a stunned silence, the kind that clings to the walls and weighs down every breath. Margaret's smug expression faltered, confusion and disbelief battling on her face. Blake's hand, still clutching the handcuffs, hesitated. Midair as realization dawned on him, slow and painful. Jalen barely dared to breathe. He watched his mother with wide, searching eyes, almost not believing she was really standing there. Calm, powerful, unshaken. Simone Carter's presence shifted. The entire atmosphere, where suspicion and condemnation had ruled moments before, now uncertainty, discomfort, and fear rippled across the room like a tidal wave. Simone's gaze locked onto Sergeant Blake, unblinking, ice-cold. "I assume you have a very good reason," she said slowly, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "For why my son was about to be arrested without a single question asked." Blake straightened, the flush creeping up his neck betraying his embarrassment. He stammered. "We received a report of an attempted theft." "Did you verify that report?" Simone's voice cut him off like a knife. "Did you check?" "Security footage? Did you speak to my son, or did you just decide?" Her words echoed off the polished floors, bouncing back at the officers, at Margaret, at the customers who now suddenly found the floor or their phones terribly interesting. Blake shifted on his feet, guilt blooming visibly on his face. "We were going to," he began, but even he didn't believe it. "No," Simone said, her tone deadly calm. "You weren't." She took a step forward, closing the distance between her and Blake, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Doyle, the younger officer, visibly swallowed. Jalen saw it, the fear of being caught complicit. Margaret, however, wasn't ready to give up her fantasy. "I called them because he tried to steal," she cried, her voice rising with desperate shrillness. She pointed at Jalen, wild-eyed. "He dropped the bracelet. He was about to grab it and run." The accusation hung heavy in the air, but now it felt flimsy. Exposed under the weight of scrutiny it could no longer escape. Simone turned her head slowly, fixing her steely gaze on Margaret. The room seemed to contract with tension. "You're sure about that?" Simone asked softly, dangerously. Margaret hesitated for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough. I saw it," she insisted, her voice cracking. "I know what I saw." Simone didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked back at Blake and Doyle. Have you reviewed the security footage? She asked again. Blake's jaw clenched. Doyle shuffled his feet awkwardly before speaking up, his voice tight. We should check the footage, he said, stealing a quick glance at Jalen. There it was, the first crack in the story. Blake exhaled sharply, defeated, and muttered, Fine. The store manager, who had been lurking uselessly in the background, jolted into action and disappeared into a back room. The room held its breath. Margaret sputtered, You don't need footage. I saw what he was doing. This is ridiculous. But nobody moved to support her. Even the customers who had so eagerly assumed Jalen's guilt were now shrinking back into the shadows, unwilling to be associated with what was rapidly unraveling into a disaster. Simone's voice remained calm, slicing through Margaret's protests. I suggest, she said, that we all wait for the facts, since they seem to have been missing from the beginning. Minutes later, the store manager returned, pale and sweating. In his trembling hands, he carried a small screen, already playing. The silent footage. Everyone leaned in. There it was. Jalen walking into the store, his posture cautious but polite. There he was, approaching Margaret, wallet in hand, cash visible. There he was handling the bracelet carefully. No attempt to conceal, no furtive movements, only a clumsy slip as the bracelet fell to the floor, no theft. No attempt to steal, just a 17-year-old boy trying to buy a gift for his sister. The truth, unfiltered, undeniable, unfolded before them. The silence afterward was deafening. Jalen stood motionless, every nerve in his body buzzing. He wasn't sure whether he wanted to cry, laugh, or scream. All he knew was that he was exhausted from having to prove his innocence when it should have been assumed. Simone turned slowly to face Blake, who could barely meet her eyes. So, Sergeant, she said, her voice soft but merciless, what happens now? Are you still planning to arrest my son? Blake's throat bobbed. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally muttered, No, ma'am. And what about you? Simone said, pivoting her gaze onto Margaret. Margaret flinched as if slapped. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked desperately at the officers, then at the customers, seeking some ally, some justification. None came. Her face crumpled, rage, humiliation, and fear battling across it. She croaked. I must have misjudged. Simone smiled, cold and unflinching. Yes, you must have. Margaret shrank back, visibly smaller now, her once righteous indignation curdling into pathetic, impotent silence. Jalen watched her, feeling a bitter taste flood his mouth. This wasn't victory. It was survival. And it shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. Simone finally turned to Jalen, her hand resting gently but firmly on his shoulder. Let's go, baby. Jalen hesitated. He turned and looked directly into Margaret's eyes one last time, holding her gaze, not with hatred but with something worse, profound disappointment. All I wanted, he said quietly, was to buy As Jalen and Simone stepped outside Belmont Jewelers, the heavy glass door swung closed behind them with a final thud, as if sealing away a part of the pain they had just endured. The sun still shone warmly over Riverton, but for Jalen, the world felt colder, harsher. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady the tremor in his chest, but the air tasted different now. Thicker, heavier, bitter. Simone walked beside him, silent but solid as a mountain. Her sharp heels clicked against the sidewalk, but there was a tightness in her posture, a fury too controlled to be loud. They didn't speak, not immediately. Words felt useless after what had just happened. It wasn't until they reached her car, a sleek black SUV parked discreetly along the street, that Simone finally turned to him, her face unreadable, but her voice heavy with emotion. Are you okay? Jalen hesitated. He glanced back at the store through the pristine glass windows where moments ago he had stood accused, judged, condemned without cause. Inside, Margaret still lingered behind the counter, visibly shaken. Blake and Doyle moved awkwardly around her, the tension between them sharp as knives. The customers, those silent witnesses who had so easily assumed the worst, now pretended nothing had happened, their conversations resuming with a fake lightness that scraped at Jalen's skin. He looked back at his mother. "I don't know," he said quietly, his voice raw. "I should feel better. I should feel like we won." Simone's eyes softened, the fierce police chief giving way to the mother who had held him through scraped knees, nightmares, and heartbreaks. "Baby," she said, gently, "you shouldn't have had to fight in the first place." The truth of her words hit him harder than anything that had happened inside that store. Jalen exhaled shakily, dragging a hand over his face, trying to wipe away the weight of it all. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." They stood in the late afternoon, sun, letting the silence say the things words couldn't. Then the door to the store opened again. Jalen tensed instinctively, his muscles coiling as Margaret stepped outside. She looked different. Gone was the smug, self-assured clerk who had called the cops without hesitation. In her place was a woman stripped bare by the truth, small, uncertain, exposed. Margaret clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. Her mouth opened as if she might apologize, but the words died on her lips. Her eyes, once sharp and judgmental, now flickered between Jalen and Simone, full of something that looked suspiciously like shame. She took a step forward, hesitated, then shook her head, muttering something inaudible. Without another word, she turned and hurried down the sidewalk, her pace quick, her shoulders rigid with humiliation she refused to fully acknowledge. Jalen watched her go, a bitter taste rising in his throat. Figures, he thought grimly. No apology, no real reckoning, just another coward running away from the mess she had created. Beside him, Simone let out a soft, disdainful scoff. "Cowards," she said under her breath. "They never know how to say they're sorry." Jalen swallowed hard, feeling an ache deep in his chest. Not just for himself, but for every kid who had been through the same injustice without anyone there to save them. It shouldn't have taken a police chief flashing a badge to make people see his humanity. It should have been enough that he was just a boy, a son, a brother. Blake and Doyle exited the store next. Doyle gave them a brief, almost regretful glance before quickly looking away. His guilt plain, but his courage lacking. Blake, for his part, barely looked at them at all. He offered Simone a curt, stiff nod, an unspoken admission of defeat. Then, stalked toward his squad car without another word. The message was clear. He wasn't sorry either. Just sorry he had gotten caught. Jalen turned back toward Belmont Jewelers one last time. Through the sparkling windows, life inside the store had returned to normal, as if the storm had never happened. Customers browsed casually, laughing, admiring. Jewelry that cost more than Jalen had earned in months. He clenched his jaw. Nothing had changed for them. No lessons learned. No scars left by what had almost happened to him. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he whispered bitterly, the words catching on a lump in his throat. Simone reached out, squeezing his shoulder firmly, grounding him. "I know, baby," she murmured. Jalen drew a deep, trembling breath, then slowly exhaled, feeling his shoulders loosen. If only a little. Maybe it wasn't victory. Maybe it wasn't justice wrapped in a neat, satisfying bow. But it was a fight they hadn't backed down from. And for now, that had to be enough. He turned away from the store, away from Margaret's judgmental eyes, Blake's silent complicity, the suffocating stares of strangers who would have let him be dragged away without a second thought. Justice wasn't perfect. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was simply walking out the door with your head held high, refusing to let them break you. Simone clicked the car doors open, and together, mother and son climbed inside, shutting the world out for just a little while longer. As the engine hummed to life and the car pulled away from Belmont Jewelers, Jalen leaned back against the seat, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his spirit still intact. He wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more Margarets, more Blakes, more moments where he would have to prove his worth just to be treated like a person. But today he hadn't been alone. Today the truth had won, even if just for a moment. And for now, that was enough. As Simone's SUV melted into the flow of traffic, the city of Riverton carried on, unaware of the small battle that had just been fought and won inside the pristine walls of Belmont Jewelers. But for Jalen Carter, nothing about today felt small. The tightness in his chest lingered. The echoes of Margaret's accusations, the cold metal promise of handcuffs, the way the crowd had looked at him, all of it clung to his skin like invisible scars. Beside him, Simone gripped the steering wheel firmly, her knuckles paling slightly with the pressure. Her silence wasn't just exhaustion. It was strategy, calculation, resolve. She had seen too many battles like this in her career, but when it was her own son at the center of it, the weight was different, heavier, unforgivable. The hum of the UR, tires against asphalt, filled the air between them, broken only when Simone finally spoke. "You sure you're okay?" Jalen stared out the window at the blurred world rushing past. He wanted to lie, to say he was fine, to move on. But the truth was more complicated, heavier. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low. "I feel like, even when you win, you still lose something." Simone nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. She knew exactly what he meant, because no matter how loud the truth rang today, no matter how thoroughly Margaret had been exposed, the real loss couldn't be undone. It was the loss of innocence, the loss of safety, the loss of believing that doing everything right could protect you. "You didn't lose," Simone said after a moment, her voice steady. "You stood your ground. You reminded them that they don't get to write your story." Jalen exhaled sharply, but he said nothing. Deep down, he knew she was right. And yet, the ache remained. The SUV turned onto a quiet street lined with trees, sunlight dappling the pavement like gold coins scattered across an old road. Life in Riverton looked idyllic again. Picturesque. A place where people wanted to believe things like this didn't happen. But they did. Quietly. Repeatedly. And sometimes it took someone like Simone Carter, someone who understood both sides of the law, to make sure the truth saw daylight. Jalen's phone buzzed in his pocket. A news alert. Belmont Jewelers was trending now. Articles, videos, furious tweets demanding accountability. Margaret Whitmore's name was everywhere. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Simone pulled over to the curb and turned off the engine. She shifted to face him, her expression hard but her voice soft. "This is just the beginning, Jalen." He met her gaze, a flicker of defiance sparking behind the exhaustion in his eyes. "I know. You have a voice now," she continued. "And people are listening." He nodded slowly. "And we're not done yet," he said, the words tasting unfamiliar but right on his tongue. "No," Simone agreed, a small but fierce smile curving her lips. "We're just getting started." The camera would linger on them for a long beat. Mother and son, sitting side by side in a silent understanding deeper than words could reach. Then, as if on cue, Simone's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and her expression shifted. Serious. "Purposeful," she answered. "Yes, schedule the meeting, first thing Monday." Another battle was already being drawn. Another story waiting to be told. Jalen leaned back in his seat, a new fire kindling inside him. They thought today was the end. They were wrong. This was only the first shot. The scene would fade out on Jalen's quiet, determined smile. To be continued. Stay tuned. The next chapter is coming, and it's bigger than you think. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Because sometimes justice isn't about one moment. It's about changing the whole. A game.